Right, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, we're on the last day of Women's Month in South Africa, and we're taking this opportunity to look at the media space, I guess, local content production, storytelling, writing in the various formats. And we've been discussing with our panelists here, but we're looking forward to getting your thoughts at home and also our audience that are sitting here, some of the questions that are coming through from them. But at Morning Live SABC is our Twitter handle if you have anything that you'd like to ask in particular. But maybe to unpack some of the issues that seem to keep coming up. And I'm going to turn to you again, Mayor Ramagoshi. What are the current challenges, you would say, and struggles facing women in local content production? When they come to you, what are their big issues that they're presenting to you?
The biggest issue is still funding. I mean, NVF is funding the development of film, but really the beginners in film. The biggest funding sits with DTI, with IDC, and in NEF. And I think until we change that model of funding, because with us, the ceiling can be 2 million. And South African filmmakers want to make blockbusters films. We see more money going to outsiders than to South Africans. And that's our biggest challenge. To say, if we want to develop the film industry, let's put our money where we are saying we want to see. Now, with NVF, we've got 3 types of funding for emerging filmmakers. That's those who cannot be funded anyway. We are funding them because we give them an opportunity to get funding, and our bulk of the money goes to the tier 3, where is the majority of those who just graduated from the film schools who are finding themselves. And the second tier is those who are already in the field, who have already made 1 or 2 films. We do give money, but not a lot. And the tier 1, those who have been in the industry, and they're mostly men, and unfortunately most of them even white men. And we're saying we cannot, as NVF, where we still want to develop the industry, give most of our money there. Please go and get money at IDC, DTI. However, that is where most of the challenge goes. And women do not even get that money there. So at the moment, NVF seems to be a haven for them, where we're saying, let's ensure that you produce as many films as possible, because once you can showcase and say, here I am now, I've made 10 films, please give me the budget as IDC and DTI, that might be an issue. We are partnering with IDC also on the women's slate. And we are saying we want to see women companies be sustainable. So we say we've got 3 years where we're saying this company, we're going to hold you by hand for 3 years. After 3 years, when we are sustainable, then we get to other slate. And I think that is the challenge that women had before. Their companies were not sustainable. After making 2 or 3 films, then it was closing. The DM was just saying some of the challenges that people are raising with NVF is that we don't fund engineers, we don't fund cameras, and we don't do that because our mandate is to develop emerging filmmakers. Okay. So I think the challenge will be how do we tap in where the money is and ensure that the money stays local for us to compete with India, Nigeria. We need to invest in our filmmakers, and that's where we need to ensure that we do that.
All right, Dr. Monareng, I'm just wondering and thinking out loud actually, because sometimes when women get commissioned, they're commissioned to tell women's stories. And I suppose the journey that we need to make is women producers, filmmakers should be just telling stories. Not necessarily that the woman must just tell a woman's story.
Yeah, you will be compartmentalizing them if you do that. You would ask them to tell the story. I told you that women are the embodiment of life, so they will tell you the story about life. But it's happening currently, and in the past it has been that the percentage of capturing life was masculine. And what happens is that we need an eclectic approach view, but with a strong bias on hearing the world that we never had before. When you are commissioned to come up with a script or a film, it is basically irresponsible to focus only on modern urban areas, because majority of women that knows much about the nuance of life as prescribed by language are in the rural area. So the element is basically to ensure that that voice comes to the fore. I don't like the mainstream and the periphery. I prefer to let them come to the people's view. There's still lots about issues that we do not know about women, particularly in the rural areas, I've said. And there's a strong market for film industry. I don't like the word to exploit, because it has got a negative connotation, but to explore and make sure that you show ground, you show face them, and for people to see that there's a different kind of world. The same thing can be linked with how you look at Africa. Africa story, which I will call it feminine story, it's not in the world's glare. We are trying to build it. Alongside that kind of looking at the world, we want to ensure that the women's story in Africa, the women's story in the rural area are shown on our televisions. We don't want to see, well, maybe it's a wrong construction. We do not appreciate only looking at Sandton, because that is irrelevant. Okay. It is relevant business-wise, but it is not relevant.
The whole story.
Yes. So that's basically where I see the role. I see the role of women in a bigger context, defining life as a whole, not in a macro element where we talk about numbers. We're talking about numbers associated and driven by quality. And the stuff that we haven't touched, that I've mentioned, rural Africa, Africa as a whole, is the nuance that we need to show ground to the world.
All right, well, we're going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, I'm going to actually hear those producers, those artists, and those storytellers from the floor here, as well as you at home at Morning Live SABC. That's our Twitter handle. We're going to get this conversation going with you right after this.